Where am I? What the hell?
Rise and shine, sleepyhead. It's time for supper.
Finally. It's so goddamn nice to see the series go back to what made it friggin' awesome. Resident Evil 7 is the latest entry in Capcom's celebrated horror franchise for PC, Xbox One, and PS4. While this entry does have its issues, it more than delivers when it comes to what people expect from a good horror game. Nerve-wracking tension and intense scares.
Hit-Boy's got to eat. He got to have his supper. Come here, boy. Let's do this. Come on.
Moving away from the fast-paced action and third-person shooting that's characterized the series since Resi 4, 7 takes the series to a more low-key setting and brings a first-person perspective along for the ride. We play as newcomer Ethan Winters as he travels to a plantation house in the bayou of Louisiana in search of his missing wife Mia, only to find himself embroiled in the blood-soaked insanity of the Baker family. This does mean the story feels more like a side story rather than anything major in the Resident Evil universe, but the smaller setting of the Baker home really allowed Capcom to focus on filling it with finer details, so much so that it evokes a strong comparison to the Spencer Mansion setting of the first game, and a smaller but ultimately more enjoyable cast of characters.
You're wasting your time.
The Baker family themselves are the real stars of this game, with their over-the-top personalities that take a lot of cues from slasher movies like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But with that being said, the protagonist Ethan, he has all the personality of a wet cabbage, and a lot of this has to do with the voice acting.
Hey, we gotta get the fuck out of here.
Now, first you need to tell me what you're doing out here alone in the middle of the night.
Me? What about you?
No, it's my job. Won't you do your job and tell me? Answer my questions.
You're not gonna believe me if I told you.
The Bakers and almost all other characters are well voice acted, with an over-the-top hillbilly twang to their speech that sometimes goes into various accents. Whereas Ethan, on the other hand, he has the worst voice actor in the entire cast. That isn't to say the guy can't do his job, but he clearly isn't putting any effort into it. Ethan's reactions to things like being forced to kill his wife or having his hand chopped off sound more like he's annoyed that he stubbed his toe rather than he's being traumatized and tortured.
It's my job. Must contain outbreak.
This can really hurt player immersion when the main character sounds like he's disinterested in everything around him. But with that being said, the biggest issue with the story is the inclusion of a moral choice. It isn't unexpected in its lead-up, but it's so arbitrary and goes against the very motivation of Ethan as a character. It wouldn't be so bad if there were a series of smaller choices we had to make to determine finer details of Ethan as a character. That way, this choice would make more sense, but as it is, it feels like they put it in to trick people into thinking it has a profound impact on the story and thus require a second immediate playthrough. It doesn't. It just changes one detail of the game's ending. On the gameplay side of things, Capcom more or less did go back to the series' roots in more than one way. You'll be constantly checking your health, rifling around your inventory, and solving some creative puzzles. But I have to confess, the inclusion of a first-person perspective and controls do take some getting used to. Not because they're poorly implemented, no. In fact, they substantially add to the experience and turn the game into my new favorite brand of laxative. It does take some getting used to because, more than anything else, it's what makes 7 feel less like a main entry in the Resident Evil franchise and more like a full-on spin-off. This is something that really boils down to personal experience, since my first time with the series was with Resident Evil 4, but I guess the same thing can be said for old-time fans who played 4 for the first time. In terms of what else this design shift brings, it does control rather well. Just don't go into this expecting to be able to shoot shit up like Call of Duty. Nothing is really said about who Ethan was before the events of the game, but he sure ain't a crack shot. When going up against enemies, you have to be real careful with your precious ammo and really strategize, because thanks to Ethan's slow aiming speed and the near constant movement of enemies, it's real easy to miss. If you waste all your ammo, all you got left to defend yourself is a dinky knife. But that's actually a good thing. If you're not constantly managing your valuable resources and thinking ahead, you're clearly not scared. And if you're not scared, then you're clearly not playing a horror game, you're playing Resident Evil 6. Aside from the first-person perspective, there's also the matter of enemy encounters and puzzles. Essentially, enemies come in two core varieties, the molded and the bakers. The bakers themselves act as a nice throwback to Resident Evil 3's nemesis, and they are one of the scariest aspects of this game. They will just keep coming and won't let anything get in their way. It is possible to kill them, but they don't stay dead, and doing so means you run the risk of using up resources that you could need later on. Whereas the molded, they act more like the zombies from the earlier Resident Evil games. They can be pretty intimidating at first, but once you get used to their attack patterns and learn to exploit their weakness to doors, they do lose a lot of what makes them scary to begin with, something that isn't helped by their sheer lack of variety. Whereas when you fight Jack or Marguerite Baker, oh sweet merciful Jesus Christ on a stick. It is utterly nerve-wracking when they chase after you knowing that fighting them is practically a lost cause. But you'll be clutching your chest to catch your breath in relief when you get away from them and make it to a safe room. But with that being said, when you do fight the Bakers in their respective boss fights, a lot of what makes them scary just gets thrown out the window. This usually applies to all the boss fights. Turns out an unstoppable Stalker becomes less threatening when you know you can hurt it, and more so when you go up against it again and again and learn how it telegraphs its attacks. Despite this, when you do actually go up against the likes of Jack and Marguerite for the first time, it can be pretty nerve-wracking. Plus, Jack's second boss fight is a real highlight for how reminiscent it is of the chainsaw duel from Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. As for the puzzles, they're what you'd expect from an early Resident Evil game. Hell, one of the puzzles is a direct homage to one from the first game. Though I would admit, with the exception of one sequence in particular, they're not exactly head scratchers. Most of the time you'll be looking for keys, which is an experience unto itself thanks to the well-realized atmosphere, but there are two types of puzzles that will require some brain power to figure out. Shadow puppet puzzles that, while not difficult, are fun to figure out, and hidden object puzzles. These are optional and they're handled as memory puzzles with some really great payoffs. How they work is that you'll find scattered photos of decorations throughout the Baker Mansion, and you need to remember what these look like as you search the rooms for them. If you figure one out and find the right object, you're rewarded with things like health upgrades and access to a more powerful handgun. As for the graphics, what can I say? This game is fucking gorgeous. Running on the well-made RE engine, Capcom used the same technique as the new Battlefront from EA, photogrammetry, to scan real-life textures into the game world. This especially lends itself well to the monsters of the game, some of which didn't start off as concept art but as meat sculptures. And this really helps make them so initially unsettling to face off at first. And it also helps make some of the more claustrophobic sections of the game feel all the more believable and intense. However, I did notice an issue with the PS4 version of the game. It suffers from texture pop-in. This isn't necessarily a deal breaker, and it doesn't suffer from it to the same severity as Alpha Protocol, but it can be pretty jarring to see all this gorgeous texture work and realistic decor, and then suddenly see a cushion or a wall that looks like we're seeing it through a cataract. Thankfully, the texture always fully loads in after a few seconds, and this issue has most likely been patched as of this video being aired.
Find the 2 key cards you're gonna need to join the party we're having over here.
Lastly, the game is fairly short. I finished it on normal difficulty at around 9 hours, but I came away from it satisfied. The content that is on the disc is meaty enough, and it's better for this to be reasonably short and sweet rather than long and drawn out. But if you're really concerned about getting your money's worth, don't worry. There's going to be a free DLC expansion called Not a Hero that will continue 7's story, and there's already some paid story DLC that's not only available, but reasonably priced. Have no fret though if paid DLC is not your thing, because the main game also has side stories that you can find. See, you find videotapes hidden throughout the game world that let you experience some of the Baker's past deeds from the point of view of their victims. These are worth keeping an eye out for not only for the extra time they add to the game, but because they reveal interesting story tidbits and even prepare you for later challenges. Hell, there's one that's practically essential because not only does it wrap up the story of the beginning hour demo, but it straight up tells you how to solve the hardest puzzle in the entire game.
Understand you, and all this is a gift.
If I haven't made it clear enough, Resident Evil 7 is a great horror game and a great return to form for Capcom's series. If you're a fan of Resident Evil 6 and how it handled itself, you may be disappointed and put off by it, but when you give it a go, there is no denying this is the better beast in every way. It can be a little wonky in some areas, but it constantly succeeds in bringing the scares. Also, if you're wondering why I haven't mentioned PlayStation VR, that's because I couldn't play it with VR. But from what I've seen, it does look a little wonky, but at the same time adds extra substance to an already terrifying experience.
Welcome to the family, son.
Alright, awesome. I just got my review of Resident Evil 7 done and dusted. If you like this video, then feel free to like, favorite, or maybe even subscribe, and possibly even check out some of my other videos, like some of my other movie reviews. I've got one of Split coming out soon, or one of my other game reviews, of which I'll be taking a look at Heroes of Might and Magic 6 next. And for next month, it's gonna be Yakuza 0 and Berserk and the Band of the Hawk. But all that and more coming up, so you're gonna want to stick around.